Hello, everyone, and welcome to this radcast of the Social Club at the End of the World. We're going to start with personal updates from everyone, and then we're going to jump into the following agenda items, which I'll just flash on the screen very quickly. We're going to talk about our context and core assumptions for this whole larger conversation. Then we're going to talk about our goals. Where do we want to go and get to, ideally, as humanity, as a world? And how do we want to get there is the third big conversation. So 3 big conversations after personal updates. But first, we're going to start with personal updates, starting with Adam. Take it away, Adam.
All right. Thank you, Jamin. Yeah, okay, so I've been working on this red man, white man video and paper that I've been writing, and I was kind of going through a dry stage, and then Melissa and Miles started talking to me, and I was inspired to write this paper, and so I'm hoping to have it published tomorrow, and it's looking like it's going to be about 10 or 11 minutes long, and it's I think it's the best one so far. I think it really really drives a lot of points home, and so I'm excited to get it out there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Adam. All right, next over to Melissa for a personal update. Take it away, Melissa.
Hi, everybody. My personal updates. I am working on getting people to sign petitions with the Sound Alliance here on Whidbey Island to stop new jets flying on airbase and test crashing those up north. This is hurting the environment and the orca whales and the people. So I'm getting people to sign those here on the island. Also about to start a protest with the local kids. We're going to do a call for plastic rubbish, and we're going to make a flotilla out of all the plastic that we make with the high school kids. And then we're going to see about floating it down to Olympia to make a statement about banning single-use plastics. So that's my update for today. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Melissa. All right, next up is a personal update from Miles. Welcome, Miles. Take it away.
Thank you, Jamin. And my name is Miles, calling in from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And always like to recognize that I'm on Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations, as well as acknowledge the Métis community of Métis Region 3. I just wanted to update that I finally, I think, broke through my writer's block. And yesterday and the day before, I was making a lot of progress on creating this open letter. And so just happy to report that. The target of my open letter is to a large part to the current, the generation now entering into maturity, sort of a letter from my generation to their generation, and sharing my creation story and what, you know, the collective field and you guys included have provided me to communicate to them. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Miles. Any other personal updates before we jump into our agenda items for today? All right. Okay, so let's jump in to the first agenda item, which is that of our core assumptions and our context. So I'm going to show on the screen here what I've written up about that. So I'm just going to read through the bullets, and then I'm going to invite whoever wants to jump in and talk to, please put yourself in the queue, and you can talk about any of those bullets that you want within this first section for starters. What is our context? What are our core assumptions? So I'm going to read through the bullets. First, if extinction is part of the plan of creation, let's go with it. Stop fighting it and simply ask, how do we live our last days, given that extinction is inevitable and it's just happening? Okay, that's one context, that's one assumption. Kind of an opposite assumption is, hey, extinction is not inevitable nor part of the plan, so let's prevent extinction to the extent possible, i.e., save as much of life on Earth as possible. Another core assumption is that collapse is inevitable at this point, which is, of course, different from extinction. Another assumption is that collapse can be prevented. And then the final bullet is the McPherson paradox, which I will invite Victoria, or if she's not available to talk, then anyone else to talk about that. And then I'll also read the Seattle Times reference from Melissa. So who would like to start off the discussion about any of these points, or all of them, or in fact, if there's anything that's missing from this list, I'm happy to add it. So I see Dan is queued himself up. Thank you, Dan. And I will maintain the queue. Oh, I'm sorry, I see Adam. Adam is queued up. And so it'll be Adam followed by Dan. Is there anyone else in the queue at this point, or who would like to be in the queue at this point? And by the way, feel free to queue yourself up at any time. Okay? All right, for now, we'll start with Adam followed by Dan. Take it away, Adam.
Okay, so if we're going to go extinct, I mean, if we're facing, if we're standing on the beach and the sirens for the tsunami go off, we're not going to just give up. We're going to try as hard as we can. We're going to jump in our cars and drive off as fast as we can, or run, or do something. And maybe, maybe it won't work. But in this case, we all this life that has been, that has been on the earth for millions and millions of years is going to end on our watch. And I think it's our responsibility to try as hard as we can. And we have tools that we can use that mankind's never had before. And one of those tools is artificial intelligence. So Jamin has a radical collective intelligence, which is a combination of human intelligence, working with the artificial intelligence. And I think that's the way it has to be. But we have the ability, we have something that we can use to save mankind or save life on Earth. And I think that our core assumption that we should try to save mankind's life on Earth, because it's our children. I mean, ask them, what do they want to live? Of course they want to live. And so we haven't, mankind has not been given the opportunity to really try yet. We are very smart, and we're able to figure things out. And there's all kinds of things that we can do. Melissa was talking about the waters warming up, and and so the animals are not able to breathe in the water. Well, what happens if we freeze the Arctic? So there's big things that we can do. I mean, if we can refreeze the Arctic, that's going to make a huge change on everything. So we need to be looking at that. I think that hope is something we want to have. I mean, we could sit here and talk all day about giving up, but when, you know, and about saving as much life on Earth as possible. But when the time comes that, you know, we're actually faced with this, we're going to be saying, why didn't we try as hard as we can, or we could? That's what we're going to be saying. When we're going to say, well, we could have done this and we could have done that. And, you know, and so I think, you know, artificial intelligence is extremely important, and we need to use it. And this is the best way of using it. I think artificial intelligence is a scary thing to use, but I think if we use it in this manner, it's the most responsible way, and it's the most advanced and powerful tool that mankind has ever had. And I think it gives us a chance that we're not thinking of, because it can tell us how to refreeze the Arctic. That's my opinion. So I'll just drop there. Thanks.
Gotcha. Thank you, Adam. All right, next up is Dan. Great to have you back, Dan. And
good to be here. Good to be here. You know, I think it's interesting that Melissa raises up the question, you know, what if extinction is part of the plan of the universe? And I think that, you know, what goes with that is the question of adaptation to the planet. And you know, we are programmed in a certain way to survive. And to survive, you have to adapt. And if you make wrong calls, you tend to get, you know, kind of a Saturnian penalty that goes against survival. And you know, historically, we see that very, very frequently, where cultures have made bad choices. They have belief systems that are just very, very maladaptive, and the culture goes extinct. You know, there's a lot of examples of that. Also, so you know, what I would say is, it doesn't appear that we're adapting to circumstances, and then you have to confront, well, why is that? What is it that prevents us from adapting? Doing things like, well, let's just refreeze the Arctic if that's feasible. Why don't we just do it? Why don't we do a lot of things, but we really don't? And I guess, you know, I go back to, you know, the belief systems that kind of dictate problems of overpopulation. In other words, not being able to take any kind of responsibility for birth control in a meaningful way, even though the technology for that has been around for a long time. And we have belief systems that exist all around the world that kind of are constraints on that kind of serious discussion. And we also have, combined with the overpopulation problem, the hardwired tendency towards tribalism. And so, you know, you have a situation, resources are contested. You know, we have going on today, you can't help but notice China and the United States have been jockeying for what, you know, a couple of decades or more for control of oil resources and other natural resources. And this is a tribalistic thing. You know, we have the English-speaking world versus, you know, the Chinese-speaking world, and the cultures. And it's all very tribalistic. And it could lead to war. That happens, again, you know, kind of frequently. And so, you know, you have all these trends going on which mitigate against adaptation and survival. You know, you need cooperation on the part of different tribes, different countries around the world. And yet everything that's going on naturally really stands in the way of that happening. And I just throw in just a couple of more things that I notice. I notice that, you know, you're having this potential revolution in France. And, you know, it seems pretty clear that a large segment of the French population have pretty much concluded that the governance, the political control by the European Union and their neoliberal economic philosophy is intolerable. And so you are starting to see rebellion, which is violent, starting to happen. I also just two other brief things. I also noticed, you know, with the issue of Brexit, they reported, you know, some guy runs into the British Parliament, and before they tasered him, he shouts, "We're coming for all of you politicians." And again, you have the same kind of populist type of tribal uprisings going on, you know, and I think that what has to happen is there needs to be some kind of a discussion and a breakthrough in the media, which is unfortunately okay. I'll come back. I'll get another chance. I'm going to pass it on, Jay.
And by the way, just to remind everyone, that's not, when I hold up fingers, that's 4 minutes, 5 minutes. That's not a hard stop. It's just more of a guideline. So if you wanted to complete your thought, please go ahead, Dan. No problem.
I'll just say, you know, I'll come back. I know I'll have other chances to talk, but I do want, you know, we have to do something about the ignorance that people have, because as long as that prevails, we don't have a chance. Okay, I'm going to pass it on.
Great, thank you, Dan. I also want to encourage people to just kind of, you know, jump in for even, it can be briefer comments, right? So that way we can get a lot of bouncing around. You know, 5 minutes is an upper limit, but it's not a goal. You don't have to talk for 5 minutes. All right. So I'm going to put on the screen the notes here and just kind of go through the list and just kind of flesh out each one a little bit more to kind of hopefully stimulate some discussion. So first, you know, if extinction is part of the plan, you know, go with it. And how do we live our last days? I just want to acknowledge that is a context. It's not one that I agree with, because I think that would really lead to a whole different sort of conversation. It's almost like maybe there ought to be two different social clubs at the end of the world. You know, one which basically says, hey, extinction isn't inevitable, you know, let's pray, let's do LSD, let's have orgies, you know, let's whatever, you know, or let's, you know, get really spiritual and prepare for, you know, that's one sort of conversation. That context kind of gives a whole world, a whole conversation. The other is, hey, hell no, we won't go, you know, let's do something about this and prevent extinction, right? You see how those are kind of two different social clubs? You get what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm in the latter, the hell no, we won't go club. And so back to, so on the screen here, where I've got the agenda, extinction is not inevitable or part of the plan. Let's prevent it. That's the club that I'm in. Now, collapse is very different from extinction, right? We can have collapse, but no extinction. That's, you know, possible, right? Ontologically possible, let's say. You know, human civilization collapses, but life goes on, including human life, but without modern civilization or organized civilization. But then the other point is collapse can be prevented. I would say that if collapse can be prevented, that requires extinction not happening. So if extinction happens on a mass scale, we're at the top of the food chain. So if mass extinction is happening, collapse is also going to happen. I believe. Anyway, just a couple of points on that. And then the McPherson paradox. I'd like to ask someone to, there's no one else in the queue right now that I can see. Melissa has posted a comment, so I'll read that before I shut up, unless you'd like to, sweetie, in which case just unmute and jump in. But after Melissa's comment, I'd like to invite someone to articulate the McPherson paradox, someone other than myself, preferably. And then perhaps to stimulate that, I'll also read the Seattle Times reference from Melissa. So here come 2 quotes from Melissa. The most recent one: people are tired and fed up with the corruption and system of politics in Europe, which is stimulating the revolution and protests. Okay, that's a valid point. Victoria, hey, welcome, Jamie. Heck yeah, brother. Looking very smart there. And so I see you're driving, so I know you'll be able to jump in whenever you want. I'll give a brief kind of overview for Jamie super quick, and then I'm going to pass the mic to Victoria, who's going to talk about the McPherson paradox, and then Dan is up in the queue after that. But first, I promised to read the Seattle Times quote from Melissa. So, Seattle Times the other day: using computer models, researchers found alarming parallels between conditions that precipitated Earth's largest extinction event and our planet today. She's talking about the Permian extinction, which Guy McPherson talks about frequently. Perhaps healing Mother Earth is part of this change: birth, death, and rebirth. So maybe Earth is just going through some big convulsion. So as promised, I'm at 4 minutes now. I'm going to go through just a quick overview of the agenda, mainly for Jamie's benefit, but hopefully others will benefit as well. So we're talking about 3 different, actually 4 different, because I just inserted one, 3 different kind of sections of interrelated questions. First is, what is our core context and core assumption? Is extinction inevitable? Is it not inevitable? You know, is collapse inevitable? Is collapse not inevitable? What's the McPherson paradox? Victoria is going to talk about that next. Then, you know, depending on what your context is, that will, of course, determine or be a kind of provide, you know, boundaries, if you will, for what should our goal be given that context, right? Should our goal be healing Mother Earth? Should our goal be preventing collapse of human civilization? Should our goal be preparing for a plan for humanity after collapse happens? Then a new section that I just inserted is core factors. This is inspired by Dan. Tribalism is a core factor. Revolution, violence, uprisings are a core factor. They're a reality now. And then the 4th section is, whatever our goal is, how do we propose to get there, right? Do we propose to get there using civil obedience, civil disobedience, AI, radical collective intelligence, religion and faith as a platform for consensus building, etc.? So now, as promised, I'm going to shift back to what I'm highlighting here, the McPherson paradox. Victoria is going to talk about that for a moment. And then Dan is next in the queue. And Jamie, were you indicating you wanted to be in the queue? Not, I guess not now. Is that what okay, no, because Jamie's driving. Okay, gotcha, thanks. Okay, so take it away, Victoria, followed by Dan.
Hi, I just wanted to share, I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to watch Guy McPherson's video of probably 2 or 3 days ago. The paradox is, I understood, just, of course it's much larger, but basically is that industrialized civilization is a heat engine. And of course, that's what's heating up, that is killing us. Yet if we turn it off, which is what we need to do to stop the heat, then it heats up within 6 weeks so exponentially quickly that nothing could survive that. So the hell if you do and hell if you don't type of scenario, as I understood it. Did anyone else happen to see that video?
Well, I know that's been something he's been talking about all along. I haven't seen that specific video, but I would add a 3rd scenario to that, which is that we use the heat generating civilization to erect geoshading and forcibly cool the planet using the heat engine of civilization, but using the heat engine to cool the planet. Think like, you know, a refrigerator which uses natural gas to power it. It cools the food using a heat generating natural gas burning engine, right? So it seems paradoxical, but that's kind of a third scenario, right? A third kind of terminal scenario. So just to be clear on those three, and then back to you, Victoria. I didn't mean to cut you off, but just wanted to interject that third. A, heat engine is killing us. B, if you turn off the heat engine, it'll kill us even faster. And C, let's use the heat engine in a smart way to cool the planet. Back to you, Victoria, if you've got more to add on that.
No, I was just saying Guy McPherson's video. I was just saying the third leg, I totally agree that you're adding, but I'm just saying he coined the phrase McPherson paradox for those things. And I, in speaking to people that aren't familiar with what's going on other than, yeah, the planet's changing type thing. And I know I harp on that, but that is the envirosphere I operate in, except for the few people who do understand here in Oklahoma, and all of you, which I appreciate being a part of. And yet I have had a conversation with someone who lives in Florida, believe it or not, and who isn't concerned about the climate at all. So I think it runs the gamut. And all of these questions, scientific or even philosophical, as you said, Jamie, it depends on which club you're in. And I think we all keep looking for information, and yet who like you said, who's going to not try to run and do everything they can to survive? So that's what we're figuring out.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Great stuff. All right, next in the queue is Dan, followed by Adam, and then Melissa added some comments, which I'll be happy to read after Adam, or Melissa can jump in herself. Okay, take it away, Dan.
So, you know, McPherson's paradox overlooks the possibility of technologies removing the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere in conjunction with shifting the way that we get our energy. And so if you operate off of the assumption that these technologies could somehow be scaled up and could actually work, as Peter Wadhams has stated numerous times, that he believes it is possible. And the thing is, with your back against the wall, you know, it'd probably be a good idea to try it. But the problem again goes back to, we have ignorance. And you know, most people around the world are clueless about these processes that appear to be accelerating at an exponential rate. And so without having discussions of it, serious discussions on the media, people getting educated about what you're up against, it just seems overwhelming to go forward. I mean, we're operating, you know, here in the United States, we are again operating, it appears to me right now, you know, on the basis of, you know, our military needs to remain dominant in the world. And that's what's all important. Why? Because, for example, the Chinese, for example, are a powerful country. They actually have the military means to destroy us as we can do to them. And we have this kind of a contest going on to exploit and take over resources to keep the industrial machinery going forward. And it just, and as long as that continues, and when you're talking about military, intelligence community, you know, bureaucratic authoritarian structures, they tend not to, you know, change very easily. In other words, this is our goal. This is what we're concerned about. We know if we don't show military dominance to the Chinese, they're going to do the same to us. And it's our job to prevent the Chinese from doing us in, and, you know, vice versa. So, you know, the McPherson paradox is true, except for the fact that it ignores the possibility of evolving technologies to pull the greenhouse gases out of the air, etc. But as long as this ignorance, this a bit, you know, one last thing I'll say is I was reading something by Noam Chomsky, you know, and I really have appreciated for decades, you know, what he contributes in terms of analysis. And he was reporting that, you know, he says, I can't help but notice when I'm driving around and I'm listening to the radio, perhaps ESPN, that these men are calling in about sports. And they're talking about sports strategies, etc., in a rather sophisticated way. They know a lot about sports, and on a level that is not just superficial. And what he was saying is, you know, and I've often thought this myself, you know, that if people understood some things that are actually going on, they would be able to, you know, really get down to it and figure out that we have to do certain things or we're not going to survive. And again, I just go back to, I think we need to have some sort of a socio-political revolutionary thrust that demands that these things be talked about and discussed in a public kind of way. Okay, I'm passing it on.
Great, thank you, Dan. Next up is Adam. Take it away, Adam.
Oh, okay. Well, when somebody builds, when a contractor, when a skyscraper, for example, is going to be built, a set of plans has to be made, and the set of plans is actually, you know, a bunch of engineers and, you know, and doctors and different people get together and they figure out, you know, they figure out all the details and they build this set of plans, and they talk back and forth via the internet. And basically the set of plans is built before the construction actually begins. So the set of plans is built in virtual reality. And there are so many facets to saving our lives on this earth. That's what we need. We need a set of plans to follow. We can't build this skyscraper without a set of plans. So I'm saying we use, like Jamin's put together here, radical collective intelligence. It's a combination of artificial intelligence and human intelligence to build this set of plans. Then all we have to do is we say, okay, well, so what about this problem of people not being aware? Well, now that's on page so-and-so. So we turn to that page and we figure out, you know, well, this is what we do with that. And to go on to people not being aware, like Dan brought up, people not being aware, being in denial. We don't really have any control of that. But what's going to happen, I mean, that's been going on forever. But what's going to happen is Mother Nature is now waking people up. So we're coming to a critical point in the history of mankind that's never happened before. And that point is where Mother Nature is going to be facing us face to face and saying, if you don't change immediately, you're gonna die. So when that happens, all these ancillary paradigms are going to fall to the side, and mankind is not going to worry about things like money and things like that. So mankind will be going, well, what do we do? And so if we have this set of plans made in virtual reality, then we say, well, this is the way we go. This is what we do. So that's my main point. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Good, Adam. Thank you. All right. Next up are some comments from Melissa. Melissa, please jump in if you'd like to articulate them yourself. If not, I will be happy to read them. And followed by Miles. Okay. So Melissa says, Dan's comment on adaptation is good. Not all species died out during the Permian period extinction. The closer to the equator survived, those species closer to the equator survived better. Oxygen loss and heating rates were higher nearer the poles. So refreezing the poles could be a great idea. Animals in the tropics were already used to higher temperatures. All right, and next up is Miles. Take it away, Miles.
Okay, thank you. Talking about McPherson's paradox is very important, and the longer as time goes on, every day I'm starting to think, okay, yeah, we are very likely in a predicament. For example, just listened this morning to Tom Hartman. He had Dr. Michael Mann on, and talking about the collapse of insects. And it's like, oh my God, that is so true. Where are the insects? And Tom Hartman said that maybe over 10 years ago, he had some trucker calling in saying, I don't have to clean as many bugs off my grill on my truck. Now 10 years later, scientists are saying, yeah, there's empirical evidence. And then I just need to look out my window or think about this summer, how many times I had to chase a fly out of the house. And it's true. Okay, so anyway, enough of that dire news, but I'm just saying, maybe it is that we're in this predicament. So I want to move from McPherson's paradox to something else that he said, and that is, on the edge of extinction, only love remains. And I've been grappling with that a lot. And most recently, this is one of the reasons why, although I really started thinking seriously about environmental destruction on June 15th, 2015. I've shared this story in the past. My daughter gets in the car, says they watched a video about how if we don't do something quick, in 40 years, the oceans will be dead. And I'm thinking, okay, what do we got here going on? It's like overfishing, it's plastic. As I said, you just can't keep up with all the science that's coming up, Anyway, so at the edge of extinction, that's where we are. That's a given, in my opinion, now. Only love remains. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm starting to really think of this on a psychological, theological level. And just very recently, I learned of a concept called the devil's trick. Now, Carl Jung defined religion as what we attend to. So the football games are religion for a lot of men. That's what they attend to. There's the answer with respect to that. So what we're not attending to is relationship. And that's the devil's trick, I've learned. And there's a Dr. Anne Ulanov has also studied this in depth. She's a psychologist, a Jungian psychologist, plus a PhD in theology, an incredible woman. So this devil's trick is actually what's had us all bent out of shape, a lot of us. So for example, people watching this who have heard me now say that I'm not a Christian are going to be like, what the hell? Because I actually had 2 baptisms. Here I'm holding up something, I don't know if you can read it, but it says, it's all about Jesus. That, I'm saying, is the devil's trick. Because Jesus didn't say, come here and become, or I want you to become Christians. That's why I'm saying I'm not a Christian anymore. Sorry, all these people that, you know, I sent invitations to and you traveled great distance to be at my almost baptism, which I canceled, and then the actual baptism. But I'm afraid I've been duped by this devil's trick, because Jesus said, I want you to love one another. You know, and so at the edge of extinction, this is what is the most important concept. And that's the value. And we have to recognize that the devil is trying to divide us. Now, when I say devil, just think of it as an archetype. If you're not inclined to think of devils and God, you can just think of it as the concept of a force that wants to divide as opposed to a force that wants to unite. And that's what we have to keep in mind. And that's where we have to call out these efforts to divide people from each other. Even though we all have all these different tribes and languages, this value of love is universal. So the artificial intelligence has to keep that in mind. Otherwise, it'll become a tool for this division. So there you go. That's all I have to say.
All right, good stuff. Next up is Jamin, followed by Victoria's comments that she inserted, which she can articulate herself, or I can happy to read, followed by Dan, followed by Melissa's comments, ditto on the previous. So what I'd like to do is kind of pivot a little bit in the conversation to, and I'll put it up on the screen here, going from kind of core context and assumptions to goal or goals. Where do we want to get to as a world and as humanity? And I'll just kick off that conversation. And by the way, it's okay to go back to core assumptions and whatnot, and it's okay to go forward as well. These are just kind of general guidelines. I don't want to be rigid in the structure of the conversation, okay? So the goals that I'm advocating for are healing Mother Earth, and as best we can, and preventing collapse, with the assumption that humanity needs to be pre-collapse if we're going to be effective. If we're going to do geoshading, for example, we need industry, we need logistics, we need governance, we need communication, etc. Right? So I just want to really make those points and then move along. We've got to heal Mother Earth. We, humanity, have been the driving force of the destruction of Mother Earth when Mother Earth was in a cool state, a relatively cool state that supported this massive, beautiful diversity of life for many tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands, depending on how you define humanity as a species. We lived in harmony with nature. The First Nations peoples of the world lived in beautiful harmony with nature. This kind of idea virus of colonization and domination came to the fore, and look at where it's taken us. So we have a fundamental responsibility to clean up the turds that we've laid on the living room carpet of this beautiful Garden of Eden. And so that's why I say our main goal should be healing Mother Earth, regardless of what happens to humanity. But paradoxically, in order to do that, we kind of need to double down on technology, right? We need to prevent civilizational collapse. We need to keep the Macarena of the heat engine, you know, going on for, you know, at least a few more rounds, if not indefinitely, so that we can forcibly cool the planet, keep the greenhouse in this cool state, this now unstable cool state, because we've overheated it and it's rapidly overheating. We need to put the brakes on that using technology, using civilization, prevent collapse, and really go for a transformation in humanity that will support all that I just said. So that's what I'm making a case for. And after talking about these goals for a bit, we can talk about, you know, core factors and how to achieve this. And I just want to mention right now, since I didn't give a personal update at the beginning, my personal update is I continue to work on, with Jamie, with Michael, with others, the plan to lobby the Catholic Church and eventually all religions to get in the game, very much along the lines of what I was mentioning, building off of Pope Francis's beautiful encyclical from 2015, Laudato Si, and uniting the religions of the world around this common goal of saving our common home. And we've been working on that. And one of the things that we've done in the last week is work on a simple story for conveying all of the above, both to the religions of the world and for the religions to convey to their flocks, which is, you know, at its core, it's a story that perhaps reflects in a very parallel way the series MASH, that super popular series from the early 80s, sorry, the early 70s through the early 80s, you know, of a military hospital in the field during the Korean War. But of course, that was kind of that show grew out of the Vietnam conflict, which was going terribly for everyone. And it was kind of showing a healing side to the whole thing, which I think had various parallel aspects. I'm at 5 minutes now. I just want to call that out. I'll wrap up here quickly. But so the simple story that we're building now is, look, Mother Earth, including humanity, is in a tailspin right now. We're going down. We're kind of self-destructing. And what we need is so imagine from that frame, shifting to a frame of a MASH unit, right? A hospital kind of MASH unit for Mother Earth and for humanity, doing this kind of organized healing, which is very inspiring. And then, you know, how do we build that MASH unit? How do we operate it? How do we staff it? How do we train humanity to be a part of it? You know, those are all questions that come in the how section, but that's kind of the simple story, which is part of my update. So anyway, having spoken quite a bit, we're going to go on to who is next. And who is next is Victoria. Just unmute and speak if you want to speak, Victoria. Otherwise, I will read for you. Followed by... Yeah,
okay, that'd be great. Thanks, Jamin. Yeah, I just wanted to add that isn't why, that's why that's not in Guy's ascertainment.
I'm sorry, can you clarify, please, Victoria?
Yes, if you could read it, because again, I don't know why. I've got a different plug and all. It's kind of buffering still. So if you could read it, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and we can hear you just fine right now, but I'll read it anyway. Geoengineering is not figured into the equation, as there is no evidence of any known workable at this time currently. You know, that's a point that Guy McPherson has said. It's a point that I strongly disagree with Guy. You know, when we first started talking and he said, you know, well, there's no evidence that, you know, humanity can turn this around. Or I said, look, Guy, in 1950, when we trained our telescopes on the moon, we saw no evidence that humanity had ever gone to the moon yet, right? Did that mean that it was impossible for humanity to go to the moon? By the way, I see Jamie's got his hand raised, so you're in the queue, Jamie, after Adam. And so anyway, I just wanted to address that point about evidence. The fact that there's no evidence that anything has happened in the realm of geoshading does not make it impossible. Okay, so with that, does that wrap up your comments for the moment, Victoria? If not, just unmute and, okay, you're good? Okay, great, thank you. Next up is Dan, followed by Melissa's comments, followed by Miles, followed by Adam, followed by Jamie. So please take it away, Dan.
Okay. Well, you guys know that I have, right from the beginning, considered tribalism to be a major, major problem on all sorts of levels, even though it's hardwired and it feels good in a lot of ways. But let me kind of build off of what Miles was saying. The idea or the reality of Jesus is it's always been interesting to me, because it always seemed like the story of Jesus, the narrative of Jesus, was a very, very progressive development in terms of religion at that time. Jesus, in a sense, sacrificed himself for the good of the community, the sins of the community, the devil, or whatever, you want to use to describe that. So Jesus sacrificed himself in a very altruistic way. And that always seemed to me to be highly progressive from the concept of God in the Old Testament. And the Jewish religion is always been very, very tribalistic, as has the Islamic religion. And with Christianity, unfortunately, from my point of view, even though part of the message was, kind of universalism, we're not going to be tribalistic here. Anybody can be part of the group. It's an open, kind of membrane for anybody to come into. But in essence, it evolved into a very tribalistic manifestation also. And these religions right now today, and you also have Hinduism and other smaller variations of the major religions. It's all tribalistic, and you can't get away from the, I know, I do think the appeal to the Catholic Church, in light of the fact that the Pope came out with his encyclical and about climate change, is a really worthwhile thing, and hopefully it'll really get some traction. But I do see, this idea with all these, with the major religions, it's kind of, where if you're part of us, then you're okay. But if you're not, and you're basically providing information that pokes holes into our narrative of what the world is about and what everything means, then you're our enemy. And for example, in Islamic fundamentalism today, blasphemy, heresy, pretty much gets you a death sentence if they can carry it out. And that's something which is intolerable if you're ever going to be able to solve problems. I would also point out that in China, where they really probably at this point in time have kind of more of maybe a state religion still in a way, but they recognize that other religious narratives are dangerous to social stability. And you know, with Christian fundamentalism here in the United States, again, you know, they would like to impose a theocracy based on Old Testament law. We can't have, if we continue to, you know, just kind of go with the flow on that, it just seems like eventually you end up with people feeling that I've got to go to war, I've got to fight for our religious beliefs, our tribal preservation. Otherwise, the afterlife is not going to, and you know, most people believe that there's an afterlife, and a lot of people believe that, you know, you go to heaven or you go to hell, some version of that based on what you do in this world. And I do think that in terms of these religions, they, the fundamentalist versions of them, they basically assume that, you know, God will intervene if God wants to. God could remake the world and remove global warming in a heartbeat, metaphorically, or not. Or God can just simply, you know, allow a flood to come. And I think that, again, not being able to discuss these religions and how tribalistic they actually are. They're not really, and you know, from my point of view, they are not beneficent, wonderful, you know, kinds of organizations. And again, it's just very, very difficult when you have this kind of these kinds of stumbling blocks. So anyway, I just wanted to, I don't know, and one final thing about what you were saying, Miles, you know, in Jungian psychology, you know, the shadow, which is in a large part about scapegoating, and also the sins, you know, probably at this point in time, it would be good if there was a lot of repentance, honest repentance for what we've all done collectively and what we're going to probably still carry out, you know, in the near future. But you have to be able to, yeah, okay, I've said more than enough. I'm checking out.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Again, those are just guidelines. So next up in the queue is Melissa's comments. She's left the call. I'll read her comments, followed by Miles. Adam was in the queue, but it looked like he dropped off. I don't know if that was intentional or otherwise, followed by Jamie. Okay, Melissa's comments. So President Bush has approved the building of a wall between, I think she may mean Trump, between Mexico and Texas that will destroy a major butterfly sanctuary and roosting area. There's a lot of dark events and actions happening, and there is a lot of light at work here as well. Makes for a very exciting time to be alive and as warriors defending Mother Earth. Our only choice, I'd suggest, is to do whatever we can. She had to check out, and she says she thanks us for all of our positivity and enthusiasm to keep the flow, to heal Earth alive. Ciao for now. Okay, thank you, Melissa. And next up is Miles, followed by Jamie. Take it away, Miles.
Yeah, Dan just articulated what I was talking to so well. And this concept of this universal concept of love is what made me realize, you know, that there is indeed this trick to divide people, because it was by visiting with and being able to connect with First Nations in my area here of the city, the First Nations referred to as Mohkinstsis. You know, I learned that they have, I pretty much believe it's a universal across many First Nations, even as diverse as they are, with over 50 distinct languages. For generations, they've talked of the need to think of the seventh generation. And they have, in their own languages, various words for love, respect, humility, and all this and that. So it was like really stopped me in my tracks to think, why am I being so ethnocentric and subscribing to the only name by which you're going to be saved is Jesus? And in fact, I had a bit of a falling out with a very progressive Christian group, I thought, when I suggested, well, maybe this peacemaker in the Haudenosaunee legend of 1,000 years ago was Jesus Christ. And the gentleman on this radio show, the pastor, said, well, yeah, but there's nothing to say in the Bible that it couldn't have been Jesus Christ, but he would have said he was Jesus Christ. And I'm thinking, well, there's so many different languages he can appear, or the spirit. So anyway, that's very ethnocentric. And I think if we can agree among the religions of the world that this universal value, which is a life-affirming force, that's what love is, a life-affirming force. What is it that's worth living and dying for? That's love. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying, now building that into everything we do, in reaching out with artificial intelligence and bringing in religions, have that as the foundational value. And I just want to add that then we move in with artificial intelligence to address Paul Hawken and his book Drawdown. Just wanted to make a point that he's most recently interviewed on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour talking about his book. Really worthwhile to listen to him talking to Ralph Nader. So with that, I will yield the floor to somebody else.
Great. Thank you, Miles. Jamie is up next, and no one else is in the queue. By the way, Jamie, there's two. Oh, never mind. Jamie is up next. Take it away, Jamie. Thanks. Jamie, can you hear me? You're on mute. Jamie.
Looks like he's frozen.
Yeah, he does look like he's frozen. I know it's pretty cold in Ohio this time of year, so maybe that explains why he's frozen. Anyway, let's give Jamie a minute. No one else is in the queue at the moment. So queue yourself up if you'd like. In the meantime, I will fill the space with some thoughts. One is that in terms of, one of our fundamental assumptions that I added to the list actually is that, that we can come up with a plan and actually, steer the ship, right? The ship, looks like Jamie's back. Jamie, if you can hear me, you are up and it is your turn to speak. Take it away, Jamie. Okay, I thought I heard Darth Vader breathing for a second there. Jamie, you're up, Jamie. Take it away, Jamie.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Take it away, Jamie.
Okay, great. I just wanted to comment on, sorry I'm late, everybody. I had a funeral. I wanted to comment on what Dan said and Miles and really what everyone said. The gal in Oklahoma, I forget your name, but I wanted to comment that we're up against a factor here, a real big factor, and that is something that I don't think we've talked about much, and it's not necessarily good news. In any case, we're up against the industrial complexes and the governments and the powers that be are literally, instead of putting our efforts towards saving life on Earth and retooling the Earth as this group wants to do, and as Jamin and the rest of us are working on with the Catholic Church and with some other ideas, they're literally trying to come up with ways, and there's business models and government agencies funding it, to export our destruction to go to other planets and take their resources to fuel what we're doing here. Mining of the moon, mining of Jupiter, resource management in the outer space. That is literally what is being phased into by the first world governments and businesses. And so we're at a difficult crossroads where obviously Earthlings believe Earth should be saved, and the power structure believes Earth should be saved for profit by utilizing the raping techniques that we've done here on this planet. And so I think that the path that Jamin is going forward with the Catholic Church, and hopefully getting the religions to spearhead this, will cause a rethinking of that. I see, I've been thinking about it the last couple of weeks, and I see that we are getting very, very good at getting out into space pretty inexpensively and mining, beginning the process of mining various other minerals and elements for use either here on Earth or on other planets, to obviously the betterment of the wealthiest and to the detriment of the poorest, which is the business model. I just think that we should be aware that the powers, the smartest people on the planet that are working on this are working on engineering out in space to keep this horrible system in place down here. And so that's something we can't ignore. And I'll go on mute.
Thank you, Jamie. Up next is Dan, followed by Jamin. Take it away, Dan.
Yeah. So again, just kind of, I would say, and I've said, and I've said it before here at the Social Club and other venues. I really think that if the necessary information were propagated, in other words, we probably have an exponential increase in the average global temperature. And this is what is going to happen as a result of that. It may lead to extinction. It may lead to desperate attempts to destroy different populations in order to try to marshal whatever can be preserved in the way of resources. If people could if I was a young person, if I was a young, we always hear the young people talked about in this way, like, what are we doing to our young? Where we're not going to be leaving them anything, like it's, our faults in a sense. And there is a collective responsibility. But the young people aren't, in terms of human nature, really any different than we were or what we are now. But I think if I was a young person and I knew that there was a high risk of dystopian consequences coming, I would say I don't want to have any children. I don't want to bring children into this world that looks like it's heading in a very dystopian direction. And as a matter of fact, I can.
Jamie, sorry, Dan, for interrupting. Jamie, please your microphone. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I can afford to wait a period of time. I can afford to wait for 4 or 5 years before I elect to have a child, and let me have the issues debated, discussed. Let me see what's actually being done. Now, if you had young people, and again, I know this is in a way it starts to go off into fantasy, but if you had young people around the world collectively saying, we want these matters discussed. We want tribalism discussed. We want exponential climate change discussed. We want the kind of neoliberal military industrial thrust that seems to drive everything discussed. And we're not going to continue to reproduce because who wants to bring a child into what's coming? And I don't want to have to, at the end of the day, make a decision as if, you know, if Guy McPherson is correct, you know, as to how I'm going to put my child down. And so I think you need this kind of a movement to emerge, maybe not on that, but on something, because time is really disappearing. You know, Guy McPherson claims that the average global temperature right now is about 1.75 degrees centigrade. And, you know, if you accept the premise, or you just want to see what's happening, if it's exponential, the time really is more of a McPherson time frame. I mean, we're just in the beginning of that. And if things work out, if God intervenes, or if, you know, somehow something happens, you know, and McPherson and the exponential function is not correct, et cetera, hey, that's all good. Everybody will rejoice. And they don't set off, you know, nuclear bombs. But the thing is, we really need something which is universal. We need the Chinese, we need the Russians, we need the Europeans, all those countries. We need everybody to be essentially demanding that these issues be discussed in a non-tribalistic way. Tribalism causes calculation. It assumes that the other tribe is essentially predatory, and that's kind of historically, it's the way it is. You know, we have to protect ourselves with military force from the other predators. Otherwise, they're going to do us in. And that's a dynamic that may have been for certain tribes over time adaptive, but it just can't be. Logically, it's no longer adaptive, and you have to reflect on it and recognize that it's a sin at this point in time to continue. And you know, I do think it is time for repentance on some of these levels. Okay, I'm going to check out and let somebody else take it.
Great, thank you, Dan. Next in the queue is Jamin, and there's no one currently in the queue after Jamin. So if you want to get in the queue, now is a good time. So I want to talk about a really important thing that Dan brought up, which is the concept of fantasy. And, you know, specifically Dan was mentioning that, you know, this idea, this strategy that, hey, what if all the young people in the world got together and said, hey, we're going to postpone having children until this is sorted out? Well, that would certainly get the attention of the world, but I believe that's fantasy. Dan, welcome. Adam, welcome back. I know you dropped off for a bit, and I'm going to put you in the queue, which will be right after me, since you were in the queue before. But anyway, so on the concept, on the topic of fantasy, so that's I think. You know, we have a lot of good ideas. You know, that's a good idea, Dan. There's no question about it. Young people postponing. I just want to mention Victoria's will have to sign off. Sends her love to all and have a wonderful week. You too, sister. Great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you next week. And but back to the concept of fantasy. A lot of these good ideas, I think very tragically fall into the category of fantasy if we don't have a viable plan to get them implemented. And I would even suggest that, you know, the idea of having AI figure out solutions that we can then all follow also falls into the realm of fantasy. Again, if we don't have a viable pathway to get that implemented. I'm a big proponent of AI. I'm a big proponent of young people postponing having children until we sort this thing out. I'm a big proponent of a lot of things, but the single biggest thing I'm a proponent of, just seeing how little time we have left, is the urgency for developing a practical pathway for getting all of these things implemented. And, you know, having indulged in my own fantasies over the past couple of years, if not longer, one of those being, hey, if we take out organized crime as a first step, take out the criminal drug cartels, you know, then that'll unite the world, and da-da-da. And then, well, and seeing how that wasn't really getting traction, hey, if we get the tech sector engaged in coming up with solutions and building the meta solution of radical collective intelligence, that'll be a pathway. Well, that turned out to be a fantasy. And the current thing that I'm, you know, actively engaged with Jamie and Michael and others is, what about religion? You know, can we get the religions of the world? Well, it remains to be seen whether that's, you know, fantasy or a viable pathway, right? But my main point is we need to really be cognizant of our ideas that we're putting forward. What of these are fantasies, and what is the viable pathway, or the viable pathways if there's more than one? We need to get really practical, is my point. Now, the region, another, you know, fantasy idea I think that I think is a fantasy is, you know, getting all the countries in the world to demand that this be discussed in a non-tribalistic way. That's like, you know, asking a football fan to not watch Monday Night Football or something. It's just very hard. You know, because countries are operating in tribalistic ways. That's kind of how they, you know, elect their leaders, is based on tribalism. So, which gets me back to our current track, our current strategy that we're proposing, which is hopefully a viable pathway and not fantasy, which is getting the religions of the world to get on board. With what? With embracing radical collective intelligence and lobbying their respective flocks to join the conversation, and to have a multi-religion, multi-faith, interfaith planetary effort to grapple with all this and design the path forward. And that path forward can include, and I believe must include, radical collective intelligence, which includes artificial intelligence, and a transcendence of nationalistic tribalism, because these various religions are international. They span multiple countries. In fact, they don't identify with any single country, which is a huge, huge plus. Certain notable exceptions, you know, Church of England, for example. But as a whole, on the whole, religions of the world are international by nature. I'm at the 5-minute mark. I volunteered Adam to be up next. If you still want to be in the queue, Adam, followed by Miles. Take it away, Adam.
Oh yeah, thanks, Jamin. Yeah, I dropped off the internet. My connection dropped off, so I had a little bit of trouble getting it back up. But so real quick to address this AI fantasy that you. So how I address this AI fantasy is so the world, we're approaching this collapse, and as we get closer to it, people are going to take it more seriously. So when we take it seriously, what are we going to do then? Well, right now we might have, you know, say we got 10 think tanks working on AI. Well, when we take it seriously, we might have 100 think tanks working on AI. So then if we have 100 labs working on AI, what's that going to produce? You know, we're going to expand the capability a whole lot. So that's what we have to. So then the next point I wanted to make was, what's the difference between now and when collapse happens? Okay, so when the collapse happens, we're going to lose all our electricity. The banks are going to go down. The stores are going to go down. And you know, chaos will ensue. Well, if we have a plan for what to do when the collapse happens, then we'll know what to do. And really, what's the difference between now and when the collapse happens? Well, the difference is we won't be able to drive we won't be, we won't have the fuel coming in. We won't have the money system will be shut down. So in the Road to Life plan that I have written, which shows us how to set up a volunteer workforce. And we set up a system that's different than the one we have. It's not based on money. It's more based on our ancestors' ways of the indigenous people that lived here. We live in harmony with the earth. And but first of all, if money is not in the way, then we'll have to go to work to provide our basic needs and our basic wants. And if we do this, we can cut that work hour week down from 40 hours to like 15 is what I estimated. So all of a sudden, the things we don't need will fall aside. Like you go to a mall, a store now, any department store, and you get just literally thousands of different choices for clothes. I counted the number of choices of toothpaste once. There was literally 300 different choices of toothpaste. I mean, there's all these different things that we have today that we don't need. Just eliminating all this stuff that we don't need will have dramatic effects on our abuse of the environment. I mean, if we can cut the work hour week down to 15 hours a week, we can cut our carbon footprint down by 70% overnight. I mean, it happened really quick. And so, the difference between now and when collapse happens is basically just waste that we've created because we have to make money. So we have to make all this stuff for waste. So that's the point I wanted to make, and I'll end there. Thanks.
Good stuff. Thank you, Adam. All right, next up is Miles, followed by Jamin. Take it away, Miles.
Okay, thank you, Jamin. So just wanting to point out a couple of things related to what has been talked about. And this book by Paul Hawken, he's the editor of a coalition. Wondering if, Jamin, you've ever thought of reaching out to him and his coalition of scientists, because I do not see anything related to artificial intelligence in the table of contents. Don't see anything in the book either. I'd be interested to ask him, and maybe if you do reach out to him, how come Guy McPherson's not in his coalition? Seems to me that you would want to have him included as well. And for both of you and Jamie, there is a couple of pages in what he calls the coming attractions. It's on care of our common home, Pope Francis. So Pope Francis made the book. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. But I think there needs to be a section in this book about artificial or radical collective intelligence. So anyway, just let you pose those questions to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. In the queue up next is Jamin, and no one else is in the queue after that, so it's a good time to jump into the queue if you'd like to be in the queue. Adam has to leave now, and he says he apologizes for that. No need to apologize. We always appreciate your participation, Adam. Dan is in the queue after Jamin. So resetting the clock here. To answer your questions first about Paul Hawken and Drawdown, the first point I want to make is that Drawdown itself is a great example of collective intelligence, because as you pointed out, Miles, Paul Hawken has this whole network of researchers and research teams from around the world who have worked on different parts of that. And so, you know, I went to a talk when Paul Hawken, about a year and a half ago, when Paul Hawken had first released Drawdown in Marin County, California. Went to his talk, submitted a question with my via 3x5 card that did not get raised in the talk, which was basically, hey, what about Guy McPherson? What about abrupt climate change? You know, you're talking about reducing greenhouse gases, but you know, what about exponential climate change? Because just cutting all emissions now would, of course, accelerate the heat engine. That question didn't get addressed. And so I then joined a long line of people to get my book autographed and have a word with him. And I was with Michael Gosney at the time, who's one of our members of Radish. And Michael Gosney knows Paul Hawken, has known him for many years. So we got up and had some words with Paul Hawken, very friendly. And I said, hey, you know, I'd love to interview you at some point about how you put together this collective intelligence, right? And so we haven't made that happen yet, but that's at least, you know, has been articulated as a wish. And in fact, Michael and I could probably follow up on that. Actually, Michaels and I can follow up on that. Michael Call and Michael Gosney. Yeah, thank you for your support on that, Miles. Thanks for raising that. And indeed, if AI is not mentioned in the book that I'm aware of, that's kind of a meta solution, right? As is radical collective intelligence. But I am glad to see that he brought up Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical. So what I wanted to also again talk about, the kind of the difference between fantasy and a practical path forward. A lot of these ideas, including the idea of reducing choices, I think falls in the realm of fantasy if it does not come accompanied with a practical plan for getting these things implemented. And that's where that's why my focus is now on the religions of the world to get a practical plan together, for uniting humanity, actually manifesting collective intelligence at a very large scale, very quickly. And then we can collectively take these great ideas, which are currently in the realm of fantasy, and put them into the realm of reality, put them into the realm of a practical path forward. And so, for example, talking about reducing choices, before I headed off to a meeting this morning, I sat down with Melissa and her daughter Alice, and they were very excited to show me about this line of clothing that they want to start, which, far from reducing choices, expands choices and expands consumption. Right now, why are they interested in doing this line of clothing? Because it would generate revenue. And of course, that gets back to the insanity that we're all living under now, which is the kind of need to hoard.
Looks like he dropped off. Oh, no, he's back. I just say while we're waiting for Adam, for Jamin, Adam, you maybe want to send your ideas along to the Drawdown people. Sorry.
Take it away, Dan.
Okay. couple of thoughts, and then I've got to get going, but I want to just throw these into the mix. The issue of fantasy, you know, there's been a lot of really good ideas that have been generated over the course of Social Club at the End of the World, and there's lots of good ideas out there. You know, I go back to the problem of ignorance. You know, if I have an idea, or Jamin has an idea, or anybody has an idea that seems rational, if the general population, the masses around the world, particularly the educated masses, do not understand what is really going on, then nothing can really probably get through until it'll, you know, probably just be too late. You know, there'll be enough weather disasters that finally, you know, people will start to wake up and their minds will open up to Guy McPherson or something like that. So what seems to be a fantasy, and you know, a lot of these ideas probably are doable, assuming there was support for them. And so, you know, it just, you need a lot of ideas, and you hope something catches fire. But I suspect, over, you know, based on what I've experienced over time, ever since I became aware of this about the middle of 2015, is that the ignorance factor is huge. I mean, you know, yes, a lot of people would be in denial, but without having the information out there seriously discussed, everything is difficult. And just a final thought about Drawdown. I was in a group where we were reading the book Drawdown, and I thought that, you know, one of the big problems was that everything that was being discussed was based on the year 2050. And so, you know, from the standpoint of exponential climate change, 2050 is not a realistic place to even be talking about. So that was one problem. The other, you know, problem I think is that the idea of Drawdown, and if I recall, it was probably in the book, you know, and it's what Peter Wadhams is saying over and over again, that the technology to remove the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere is theoretically possible. But I heard Peter Wadhams, you know, a couple of years ago even, I think, talking to Thom Hartmann. And, you know, Thom Hartmann asked him, do you sign on to the Guy McPherson stuff? And Peter Wadhams said, well, no, you know, I think we could do something. We have to shift money from the militaries around the world, et cetera, you know, all the military industrial stuff, into, you know, a Manhattan Project or a Marshall Plan, or I forget exactly what he said, but to draw down the greenhouse gases at scale and refreeze the Arctic. And he said, if that doesn't happen, then Guy McPherson and I are pretty much in agreement. And so, you know, you just get to this place where I think it's just, you know, the ignorance that's out there, and we can all, you know, say what we think really contributes to it and everything, but the ignorance stands in the way of anything being done. And I think people need to have, you know, their eyes opened up to understand that things are not going to work out as they have, you know, or at least it's highly probable they're not going to work out as they have in the past unless some major league things are done. And so I do think Drawdown is what needs to happen, refreezing the Arctic. We all understand that, but unless the ignorance is removed, everything will remain sort of, fantasies. Maybe we like some fantasies better than others, but what can get traction? What can catch fire when you have the ignorance? I gotta get going, once again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be among you and to be able to have these discussions. I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Take care.
Thank you so much, Dan. Dan, it would not be the same without you. So we need you here. All right, Miles is up next, followed by Jamin. Looks like there's 3 of us left hanging in there, a couple people viewing. All right, take it away, Miles, followed by Jamin.
So I want to pick up on what Daniel was talking about, Peter Wadhams. He said recently that he feels the last ditch hope is to activate this technology to start sequestering carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And the technology does exist. And indeed, this is why last call I asked if we could put nuclear disarmament onto the agenda. Because as Daniel said, it's going to take a worldwide unifying unity to address this. So the expenditures on weapons, which is trillions of dollars, has to be diverted to creating these plants, these sequestering plants to be proliferated like the Richard Nixon wanted to see 1,000 nuclear power plants in the 70s. That was his dream. 1,000 nuclear power plants. Well, we need 1,000 CO2 sequestering plants constructed. And that means a joint effort, just like they're doing on the International Space Station, but doing it down on this space station, this spaceship Earth, and cooperating in the same fashion. So we divert the ridiculous amounts of money being spent on weapons into sequestering carbon. That means nuclear disarmament, and that's where hopefully someday we could talk about that too, because that's where the energy has to be taken from and diverted into a Marshall Plan, this time not to build nuclear weapons. Not a Marshall Plan, a Manhattan Project. I mean, not to build nuclear weapons, but to build these carbon dioxide sequestering plants.
Very good, very good. All right, Jamin is up next. No one else is in the queue. There's just the 3 of us, so I say we just kind of go more towards just kind of bounce it around. So feel free to just jump in. No need to queue up. I've been talking plenty myself, so just interrupt if you feel like it. But I wanted to add that having been running the Social Club at the End of the World for about 1.5 years now, and talking about a lot of these different ideas, fantasy and otherwise, and just seeing how the world just continues, not just to continue on its death spiral, but actually accelerate down the death spiral. I see my original thesis, which I articulated 1.5 years ago, our original thesis, with a nod to Michael Call, who I co-created the thesis with originally, and then others have joined, and we've expanded it greatly. But our original thesis of the imperative for radical collective intelligence to help guide us through and create all the pathways that we need to turn fantasies into realities. That, for me, remains the most urgent and crucial part of the whole thing. Because, number one, radical collective intelligence, it is a reality. It's just a reality on a very small scale. And we're now at a point where we can scale it up, leveraging the religions of the world, leveraging our own networks. Many other networks have been suggested as, that we need to invite them. Student and Teachers Union, with a nod to Adam Soul's suggestion. I think that's a great one. But however we do it, we need to scale up radical collective intelligence ASAP so that we can figure out viable pathways for implementing so many of these great ideas, which are currently in the realm of fantasy, which we can bring into the realm of reality. And I'm very grateful for everyone on the Social Club for participating in collective intelligence. And I'm just thinking out loud, what's it going to take for us to get other people into the collective intelligence? What's it going to take? We've gone after the tech sector. We've gone after universities. We're currently going after the Catholic Church, going after in a good way, inviting them to participate and engage their flocks, respective flocks, the different religions, respective flocks in the collective intelligence. But it remains for me the most urgent, crucial question of all. How do we get collective intelligence to expand and grow and to have a fighting chance against the collective stupidity of our current inertia and our current downward spiral? How do we do it? Again, jump in any time.
I would, I'll kick into, try to segue what you're talking about into the item that I asked on for the agenda, and that is to go back and forth on the concept of using not only activism, but civil disobedience. I was really quite surprised to watch one of the scientists warning videos this week, which Stuart Scott does an excellent job of bringing people to a panel. So at conference of the panelists, the COP24 there in Poland, and he had the group Rebel Extinction. And he said nothing to dissuade them from some of their tactics, which are spray painting walls or digging up soil or grass to bury a fake coffin. And that concerns me a lot. I do not see how doing property damage can in any way be supported. And it's such a wasteful strategy to do things that get you arrested, in my opinion. Now, I think the important thing to stress is it tells us that young people are very much ready to act, and obviously very disenchanted with the current situation. So I acknowledge that, but I think that's where the guidance of older people such as ourselves we need to really step up with this radical collective intelligence and have it based on civil obedience. So in other words, we as the masses of intelligent people, of ethical people, now start saying, hold it. If there's something being done that is not life-affirming, we're going to call it out, and we will actually, if necessary, start enforcing the law. So in other words, flip this around from thinking I have to spray paint something and get myself arrested, to flipping that totally 180 degrees and saying, no, we're going to be doing the arresting. We are holding up the highest value, and that is the affirmation of life on Earth. And so there's many instances where if the masses of people became ninjas in the law and their constitutions, that people would be getting thrown into jail instead of being rewarded. So a case in point is the Alberta tar sands, or oil sands, I don't care what you want to call them, government leaked report saying that the remediation of tailings ponds is a 260 billion, that's with a B, expense. I've, as a citizen of Alberta, have been lied to for decades. I was even at an event where there was candidates contesting to be premier of Alberta. And one of them was standing there saying, oh yes, we need to be so proud of the technology that Alberta's developed to remediate these tailings ponds. It's a complete fraud is what it's being exposed. So, this is where people need to, and this is where the radical collective intelligence may start with just actually, what is the intelligence to become, ninja citizens? And we start wresting the control from the oligarchs back to the intelligent people. Anyway, thought. Are you muted, Jamin?
Oh, sorry. I was trying to talk. Go ahead, Michael. Please go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say thank you for everything everybody said. I'm gonna drop off and look forward to seeing you on the Social Club, presumably next week.
Absolutely, we're on every week, and I was just about to comment that I need to conk out, take a little nap before my next meeting in a little over 40 minutes from now. So unless there's any final comments, and if there are, feel free, I will move towards wrapping up. All right. Well, really good program today. I love what we're doing. I hope we will be making a difference in the world. I have faith that we are. And let's just keep at it. What each of us is doing individually and collectively, and building out the collective intelligence. So great stuff, everyone. Any last words, Miles?
Yeah, just like, it's all about getting down to drilling into the real truth. There's a lot of misinformation, and again, this idea of tricking people into disrupting their relationships between people. And the more we can get to the truth of things, like I was just elaborating on, the more empowered we become. So a big part of this radical collective intelligence is to actually present information. So like, for example, I just learned this week that Lyndon B. Johnson knew in 1965 that CO2 was going to be an issue in the future. I also just learned recently again that the American Petroleum Institute knew in 1965. So LBJ and the API knew in 65 that CO2 was going to be causing these problems. And that's where we have to say, all right, obviously our current paradigm hasn't worked for us. It hasn't been truthful with us. And what needs to be changing there fundamentally? Because unless we actually get to the truth and have truth presented forthrightly, then yeah, there's not much hope. So hopefully this conversation moves that forward. So thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, Miles. And thank you, everyone, for participating and for watching the Social Club at the End of the World. We'll see you next week. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you.